Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Nest Fest wrap-up for the end of the year. We just thought it would be a really lovely way to bring our speakers together again and to give you guys a chance to ask some questions. We know it's super busy. It's Friday, the 1st of December, so there's many apologies, but we are recording the session. So if you're watching this afterwards, I hope you get some of the answers that you were looking for. If you're in the audience, please put your hand up. This is a bit of an, how we kind of operate at the fundraising Nest. Just put your camera on, put your hand up and ask a question. Kay Marie Dunn will be joining us in a short while. She's not here at the moment, but we will kick off our session today. And I think I might start with, I'm going to go straight to Jess. Jess, your session was with the feedback. In fact, I was just reading the feedback before we started here. Equally, all of you got such amazing feedback. I think everyone enjoyed every single session. I think one of the questions we have for you is, you highlighted at the beginning, there was so many gaps in what you needed to do. And when there's so many gaps, did you focus on one thing at a time, or did it require each thing to be done a little bit at a time, or was it focused, let's do this, this, this? What was your approach?
Oh, that is a great question, because my go-get-it brain wanted to focus on everything at once. And that only lasted about 2 months before I realized that this wasn't the right way to do it. I do think Laura calls it putting things back in cupboards, is her analogy for it. If you open all the cupboards at once, you're going to drown. So I had to open all the cupboards up to realize the gaps to begin with, but then I actually had to close them again and prioritize. And that can be really challenging because you know that the gaps then exist. So for me, one of the first things I focused on was actually making sure we had the right infrastructure in place. So it was the technology that we were going to require to do all of those other things, because otherwise, if you start to roll out campaigns without that technology and that infrastructure in place, you're just wasting your time and you're wasting your resources. So but that is a great question, because like I said, I did open all those cupboards first, and then I had to quickly
you had your vision and then you almost had to go backwards. Yeah. Thank you. Alex, I'm going to jump to you. You kicked off our session with one of a very, very in-depth, and for me in particular, it was like, wow, this is incredible. So one of the first questions I want to ask you about your session, what specific types of segmentation variables have shown the most impact when modeling donor behavior?
Yeah, good question. So I think it's important to remember that behavior is most predictive of behavior. So if you look at a donor's previous donation history, for example, and what time of year they give and how much they give, when you're thinking about who to select for communication, it's most likely that that's going to help you. If it's a case that you haven't had donations from someone for a while, I'd then be looking at, have you actually been sending them asks and communications, and how have they been responding? So if you keep asking someone and they keep saying no, then that's equally as predictive of the fact they used to give to you. In the absence, because you've had a big gap of how long it's been since you've actually been receiving donations from someone, you can always try to map the data to third party, RFM data, the sort of thing that we can help people with, and we found that works. I'd take a look though at some of the variables you have, and just remember things like geodemographics or age or income or things like that. They'll tell you who people are, and they might be indicative of I guess, their capacity to give, but they're not usually particularly predictive of future behavior. It's just telling you who, not what, who someone is, not what they're likely to do. So try to think about, behavior really as the biggest one.
Awesome. Terry, I'm going to jump over to you and your friend, your ChatGPT friend. And I'm going to throw in a question. This is a new question that's come in. And do you think, I guess it's still new, but do you think it will become apparent quite quickly what's ChatGPT versus real humans when it comes to writing?
Yeah, that's a tricky one, because it all depends on the quality of the prompt
the prompting of the author who's actually doing it, and on their capacity to review the output and all of those things. Certainly, I've done a couple of, I've used it myself since our last meetup in Wellington. Of course, we've been drowning here in end of year appeals, Christmas appeals, and so I haven't had a lot of playing with it, but I've certainly used it in a couple of different ways with our team members, just to try a few different things out. I've actually used it, you asked the question, can you distinguish, or will it become more obvious? I think the quick answer to that is it already is obvious if people are lazy and they just use it to generate an output. I can see that in AI generated subheadlines and things where you just want to scream, it's like, you're lazy so-and-so. Seriously, you couldn't have just reviewed that and put a bit of journalism flair on top of it. So
yeah, and if there's plenty of emojis, I've been playing about with it a bit, and discovered it really loves emojis if it gets a chance.
That's interesting, isn't it? Somebody else said that to me, someone else on my team. I used it interestingly recently. We had a potential new candidate who was keen to join our team on the digital side. Came to us with a really good CV, and like we do with most people, look, here's a little assignment, and it was an EDM. I think it was something like that. It was an EDM. I gave a backgrounder. Here it is. Come back to us. We just want, we had his portfolio, but we wanted to see on the fly. And because I was actually on deadline for a couple of other things, I gave ChatGPT the same assignment that I had given him. And it was interesting just to see what the output was. I kind of looked at both of them and I thought, I could take a little bit from each. His was definitely superior. Yeah. But there was some things in the ChatGPT version which certainly could have benefited that. So it's those kind of things, ways I'm using it, not intensively in writing appeals or anything like that. So the short answer is I can't definitively answer it. It's an open question.
Get used to it. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Dominique, I am going to jump over to you. What a session. I think it was, again, the feedback was incredible. And I don't think I think everyone in that room will have recognised either red flags from themselves or their colleagues. And so my first question to you is, when you've gone away and you've noticed a red flag, if it's particularly in a colleague and someone may be above you, what would be your advice to a fundraiser or somebody that was at an event who can see the red flags in a senior member of their team? How would they approach that?
I think it depends on the relationship you have with that person. When it happened to me, I had a really positive relationship with my CEO, and it could have happened to her. She was a workaholic. So I would have felt comfortable raising that in that situation, but I don't think that would be generic for all of your more senior colleagues. So if it's somebody that you're not comfortable raising it with, then I'd probably go to head of people or something like that and just go with it. Look, I've noticed, I'm concerned, maybe you could have a conversation with that person type of thing, I think.
Yeah, or it might be an opportunity to ask the team if you can run a little session on burnout 1 hour, on a Friday afternoon. And help them identify it. Absolutely. Brilliant. Do we have any questions, Esha, coming in from our audience? If not, I've got some more lined up here that I'm going to go back to Jess. Jess, what advice do you have for smaller non-for-profits or organisations with limited resources looking to prioritize the kind of thing you showed us around, looking after your donors and the journey that you have taken your donors on? What are the small things without huge resources?
I think looking at your communication and looking at opportunities to make it more donor-centric. I think one of the common things I see is we're so good at talking about ourselves and just thinking by talking about ourselves, people will agree. And that's a really easy win. If you really just sit down as a team, even if it doesn't cost much money, just to review how many times you say you and we.
Yeah.
And not the donor. That's a really easy win. I also think to be honest, a supporter survey is an easy win as well. Even if you've got limited resources, it doesn't need to be fancy, but you're going to learn a lot about your supporter base. And to be honest, I also think that if you're a smaller charity, you've actually got a lot of opportunity to leverage that, because a phone call goes a long way. And so if you've got a smaller database, you can have a lot more of that sort of touch point. And I've watched that happen to me personally as our database is growing.
Yeah.
We've had to change our approach to being quite a one-on-one approach to, obviously we didn't have the resources to reach out to everyone. So use it to your advantage would be my advice for that one.
I mean, it's getting probably a bit late, but I remember in November when I was at an organisation and was had to have a hysterectomy, and I was in hospital and I had like 3 weeks off. And I was like, somebody deliver like 200 Christmas cards to my house, and I'm going to handwrite Christmas cards because I had nothing else to do. And it was a really nice kind of, I was lucky I had that rest opportunity to handwrite a couple of 100 Christmas cards, but it does make a difference.
Better. Yeah, on handwritten goes such a long way. And I'll still often stop our team and have a day just to write handwritten postcards. As much to everyone's RSI at the end of the day, but people notice that stuff, that non-automation.
They absolutely do. Yeah. Alex, coming back to you, people love to hear stories of success, and that's I guess how they can relate to what they can do. Are there any notable success stories or case studies from your experience where these kind of techniques and analytics that you showed us really did make an improved difference?
Yeah, great question. The answer is absolutely yes. For example, we've had 2 campaigns recently where people felt that they had older data that wouldn't be worth mailing, and they weren't really sure who to mail if they were going to do something. So they said they just wanted to buy new data. We then said, well, why don't you give us that old data? And what we'll do is we'll use similar data sources, but we'll actually match your data to the external data, and then we'll find selections within that, and separately we'll just look for really good selections of similar lookalike people. So from a reactivation perspective, we actually found that by using analytical techniques over reactivation, we had 2 to 3.5 times the response rate to those campaigns. That was really good. Another example was actually not from charity, but it was really good in terms of testing assumptions. We had an energy company come to us and say that they were losing customers to a specific competitor. They felt that it was probably because the competitor was cheaper, and therefore it was likely because people were poor. And therefore they just made this big assumption and they were going to run their marketing around it. So we profiled the difference between the people that were staying and the people that were going, and we found actually it wasn't the case. In fact, they were just younger, more tech savvy, well educated, and therefore were better at shopping around. So it's really good, I think, sometimes to actually take a step back and challenge your own assumptions with some analytics and do that. I'm also going to put something into the chat. We're an Aptico partner, which is software that effectively assists with analytics and helps people to give a better customer experience. And there's actually a wonderful page of just loads and loads of customer success stories that I can share that actually talk about how predominantly in the UK, where the software comes from, charities have actually been able to leverage their data to get a better improved experience and better ROI. So I'll put that in as well.
Awesome, that would be great. We can definitely pop that into the hub as well. Terry, coming back to you, are there any specific donor segments or types of communications where ChatGPT generated message, I know it's kind of hard to tell at this stage, but are showing more effectiveness? You kind of almost gave a little bit of an example how you can use it in, I guess, internally. But yeah, is there anything standing out where it's more effective compared to kind of traditional messaging approaches, do you think? Like social media, is it versus direct mail?
I'm going to say the jury's out for me personally and for our team, just because we haven't done enough testing on it. We haven't had clients who are willing to do that. They want to roll out a campaign. It's like everything, isn't it? You want to test. In terms of the donor segments, I would say just anecdotally from what I've been reading in blogs and even talking to some of our clients, that ChatGPT certainly has application for potentially peer-to-peer fundraisers, for community events, for generating for time for event coordinators, for example, if they need to push out some EDMs, you know, again, using the basics of, you know, prompting really well, briefing really well, reviewing really well. I think it can churn out a lot of that quite easily. I read the other day a blog, and I can't remember what it was, someone who was saying he actually set ChatGPT the task of generating 5 different messages for donor Christmas cards, but specifically for his major donors. And he actually, you know, briefed ChatGPT saying, I want you to give me 5. This is the kind of tone. I want it to vary from formal to nice and friendly. And he kind of took the best of them. And I think, and I haven't seen, you know, he was kind of writing it in real time. I believe that he'll have a follow-up. So it'll be interesting to see. That's where it's headed for me.
Yeah, absolutely. Dominique, during your session, you absolutely encourage vulnerability, and it always comes. Not a question I struggle with, but I know a lot of people. I've subsequently actually been out in Adelaide, and prior to that I was in Perth, and the huge response had very similar people come up to me and say, "Oh my God, it's so refreshing that you can be yourself at work. We're just not allowed to be ourselves at work." And I find that I just dumbfounded that, you know, there's a real perception that you can't be yourself at work. Have you got any advice on how people can be more vulnerable without feeling exposed or risking their professionalism?
Yeah, and vulnerable is a tricky one, because I'm a big fan of it, and you know, in my session I quoted Brené Brown a lot, and she talks about it a lot. So I'd recommend, first of all, that you read some of what she has to say about vulnerability. I also talked in my session how I've got an ADHD diagnosis, and to be perfectly honest, that does mean that I have a tendency naturally to overshare, which is not always helpful, and there is a too much information point when it comes to vulnerability. And I think you want to use your judgment. You know where those safe spaces are that you can talk in that way. But equally, you know, that whole authenticity, being real, being who you are, is critically important. And I seriously believe that you will do better in your job just by bringing that. And if you find you're in a workplace where that really isn't okay, then to be honest, I think I'd be wondering if I was in the right place.
Absolutely. I don't know how many times I was told, Michelle, you know, in your reviews, Michelle, you tend to wear your heart on your sleeve. And in one circumstance, this was actually told to me in a positive way. We really appreciate that. That's why people endear to you. But in the next job, it was very much, this is basically, you're not very professional. And that was a moment where I was like, well, I'm just being me. I am, and you're right, you can overshare. I'm going to talk about one of the sessions I do is being your authentic self. Is you don't have to tell everyone your life story, but if you don't bring a little bit of who you are to work at some point, then you're never going to have those relationships that you can be vulnerable. You know, you've got to, if you've had a shit day, or, you know, you're late to work, you can lie that it was because of the traffic, but if it's because you actually just couldn't, something happened that morning, like you're allowed to, you should be allowed to share a little bit of your life, or what's going on for you. I feel very strongly about that. It's going to be a huge focus for it.
Sorry.
No.
I was going to say, you do better work when you know, when you've got those trusting relationships with your colleagues. You know, your output is better, the organization does better.
Yes, absolutely. I think what I have I realized there's still a huge expectation of this professionalism. And I talk about, I used to have a work wardrobe and I don't anymore. And that's, for me, great. You know, I can wear what I go out to have a drink with my friends and what I wear in the office. And that was a moment for me where I was like, I am being my authentic self. I don't have to be this person, and that's a small step, I guess, of just merging into being vulnerable. Anyway, enough about me. Alex, back to you. Are there any pitfalls or common mistakes? I think that's what our audience want to know. You shared a lot of information, but before they start kind of unpicking everything or starting what you kind of shared with them, what should they be aware of? The pitfalls?
Yes. So if you cast your mind back to when you were at school and you did science, you might remember when you wanted to test something, you always had a control. So, you know, here's our test, but here's without the test. And people need to remember to do that. So if you're going to make some analytical, segmentation, for example, on selections for a campaign, that's great, do that. But then also run what you'd normally select or run something random at the same time. So you can see what the uplift is, because if you don't, then you're forgetting that there might be external variables that are having a much bigger impact. So for example, macroeconomic conditions. So, you know, you're doing something in the lead up to Christmas, people are feeling the pinch right now because of inflation. It might be that your campaign went down. And if you just put all your eggs in the basket of I've made my selections based on analytics, you're going to go, well, that didn't work. Whereas actually it might have been working really well. It's just that whatever you were going to do without it went even worse. Also think about things like, you know, if you're collecting data and you're looking at, you know, who your customers are, think about where you got them from. As I talked about, you know, if it's the case you've got a retail position, you know, in the poshest part of the poshest town, then that's going to reflect back to you. You also want to think about when you're looking at analytics, don't just look at percentages, look at the numbers as well, because sometimes you'll realize you're comparing 2 to 3 rather than, you know, 2,000 to 3,000. So it's got to be statistically valid what you're looking at. And again, like I said, you know, when I talked about the difference between data mining and profiling, mining is looking at your data in a vacuum and just seeing what's what. You need to take a step back and think about what's the difference between this set of data and the statistical bias that I can actually see. And then I think, finally, I guess, if you're briefing a data team or you're trying to build an analysis, don't try to get data to prove that you're right. People come to me all the time and they say, you know, my gut feels this, and I need you to get the data to tell me these numbers. And the answer is no, I'm going to tell you what the data is telling me, and then you're going to find out if you're right or not. Because you should go in with your eyes open and open to possibilities, rather than going in trying to get data to be a tool to prove you're right, which is kind of silly. Otherwise, there's no point in doing it. But it's amazing how many analysts I know who say that's their biggest bugbear, is management saying, you need to show I'm right with these numbers. And then really, you're going to end up manipulating them, which is pointless. So let the data do the talking.
Yeah, awesome. Jess, back over to you. A similar theme here, in your experience, I guess, and what's the common mistakes or pitfalls that you have encountered, or you've seen that would be easy for other organizations to make when trying to do the amazing stuff that you did? You know, what's the easy mistakes to fall into, or the pitfalls?
I think, following what Alex just said very well, don't think you're the audience, and don't think just because something resonates with you that it's going to resonate with everyone, which leads on to understand who you're talking to. Because most of the time we're not the audience, we're not the demographic. Sometimes that can align, but I'd say most of the time it doesn't. Don't talk about yourself too much and your own achievements, and understand what you're actually fundraising for. Because if you don't understand why, then how are you expecting your donors to understand why? And I think as charities, we do a lot at understanding the what we do and the how we do it, but that's not what's going to resonate with the people that you're asking to support you. So
yeah, I remember an organization I worked with, we were looking at our new strategy, and I started backwards with the board session was, okay, if we ceased to if we shut the doors tomorrow and we did not exist, what would be the impact on the world if we did not exist? And if you can't answer that, or you know, find a story find the narrative of what impact would you know, what would change if you cease to exist tomorrow. And I think if you can't answer that, then
you got a problem. Or you're focusing on the wrong things. Yeah, absolutely. I think it's I get in a lot of debates with people because I still don't know the answer, but you know, people are like, oh, we give to statistics, we give to percentages of how much good you've done and how can you show what. But it's like, well, that means nothing if you don't understand what those percentages are trying to achieve in the first place.
Yeah.
So it's like, yeah,
Yeah.
it's an ongoing
What does it
debate
mean?
for me.
Yeah. What does it mean to everyday Kiwis,
mean?
Aussies, global
Yeah.
citizens about, if you didn't exist?
And
What
if
does it
I
mean to
read
them?
that whole sentence, making a difference, I think is used by so many charities. And quite often I'll ask, well, what is that? What's that difference? Why aren't you
Yeah.
saying what that difference is?
Mm.
Because
Yeah.
if we're, of course, we're all making a difference, but what is that? And
Yeah.
I think, yeah, that's a big it's a bit of
Yeah.
button pusher for me.
Yeah, absolutely. Terry, coming back to you, beyond thinking around thank you messages and some of the things we looked at, how do you think ChatGPT can be utilised to maintain ongoing, and I guess kind of connects in with Jess, but ongoing and meaningful engagement with donors in the donor kind of stewardship, donor love, donor journey part? You just explained a really good example, actually, didn't you, with the thank you card?
Yeah, and look, yes, absolutely, and I keep banging on about, you know, personalising it and honing it and, you know, reviewing it and so forth. I think the only way that it can become more and more useful is if you are feeding it really good quality, really personal donor-centric communications, giving those examples. You know, and when it comes back regenerating, I found something I did prior to our sessions. When I do the regeneration, I would actually tell it why I wasn't comfortable with what I said. I needed to be more donor-centric, and I needed it, to your point, Jess, I needed to stop talking about the organisation so much and talk about the impact on the impact of the supporters' donations and so forth. So look, I think I said that in the session, how long's a piece of string, how you might use it in an organisation. Are you a small organisation that's absolutely resource poor and you need to channel what little energy you have into doing a lot of those more automated tasks? I would say there are certain things you 100% would want to quarantine from ChatGPT, and number one would be your fulfillment letters, because if you can't write a heartfelt thank you letter to your wonderful donors and have to ask artificial intelligence to do it for you, I actually see that as problematic. You know, your core communication for an appeal needs to come from the heart, because that's where your angles and your strategy goes. Some of the outputs, your social media posts, those kind of things, I absolutely see engagement ongoing with donors, but again, carefully managed, and look at your whole donor journey and actually identify where you think there are places that ChatGPT could be an appropriate tool and aid rather than author of.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you go on to YouTube and look it up, I saw something talking about ChatGPT the other day. It was a letter from Nick Cave, the singer, to ChatGPT, and it was read as an open letter on a series sponsored by Mont Blanc by Stephen Fry. And it beautifully articulates the danger in the loss of creativity and talking from the heart. So it's, I'm hearing what you're saying, and it just made me think of that speech. It's a wonderful thing to watch, actually. I really enjoyed it.
I'll check that out.
Check that one out. Dominique, I'm going to come back to you. You described your story beautifully, and I'm going to go out there and take a guess that potentially 80% of fundraisers have had red flags of potential burnout, not actual burnout. How can we? Not every organization will allow you time off. Your life just isn't like that. What advice have you got if people feel that they're in burnout, but they can't do the big kind of, I need to get out of here? What things can they put in to their work life and their kind of personal life that can help?
Okay, so I mean, if you've got to that point, my first thing would be to seek help. And most organizations have an EAP, employer assisted program, and that would be my stop number one. So get some external support, somebody that you can talk to, somebody that can, you know, back up. And it may involve you needing to have a conversation with your manager about how you're managing your workload. And you know, and there's simple things, you know, like not long before and I was lucky that I did get to have a big break from work, but not long before that, I turned off my email notifications on all my devices because I had them on everything.
Yeah.
And you know, and so there's those simple things, and it's there's no rocket science in all of this. It's taking care of yourself and sorting out your priorities and making yourself the priority, because
Yeah.
you know, if you don't, you can't do your job anyway.
Absolutely. I've had to do a few recently. It's been a big year for us, and particularly on the weekend, I've got my 5 kids. They all want to talk to me, and I give them Saturday morning, I talk to them all, and then I turn my WhatsApp entire notifications off for 24 hours, which means I don't hear from friends either. And I tell them that, I say, I've spoke to you all, you're all fine, but actually Mum's turning the WhatsApp notifications off. If there's a real emergency, then somebody somehow will get in touch with me. But it's amazing how you actually you can just go, okay, there's nothing going to just elevate that kind of, I need you, I need you, I need you. So that was really important. And the other one that me and Isha implemented with her suggestion, she goes, you know, I think you're tired, Michelle, it's been a big year. What can we do? And quite often I will have kind of meetings or corridors and she's not there. And then I've got so much information sometimes from just one conversation. And then there's a couple of conversations and I feel I've got so much information in my head and it snowballs. So now, you know, every meeting that we have, Isha is there to be sure that she can back it up with following through the notes, and she knows the information. And so those simple things have really helped me over the last kind of month. It's yeah, you've just got to think really practically.
Nice.
The wonderful Kay Marie has now joined us. Kia ora and welcome to our Q&A session. Thank you for jumping in. I know you're in the middle of a hui. We have just been jumping around asking everyone some questions, but we might kind of focus on you for a little minute if that's okay.
Good, everybody.
Good to
Absolutely.
see you.
Hello.
Yeah, we've had a great catch up, and so everyone's had a chance to answer some of their questions. So, Kay Marie, your session, I was just reading the feedback, absolutely, I think really gave everyone food for thought. I will share the feedback with the speakers. I think it's something we still need to do. And I think that the questions that were coming through more than anything that was just absolutely brilliant, but how we can, you know, we've listened, we've heard you, but now what are the, I think the first question is kind of, how can the larger organizations or entities kind of tangibly, or, you know, not just listen and hear, but kind of support and engage, and it's a huge question, and actually start doing something beyond kind of just giving financial aid to Indigenous kind of communities? What is it you would like them to start actioning?
It's a good question and a big question. And considering the political climate at the moment, I still feel quite strongly that organisations should look at implementing a Te Tiriti strategy at a governance level. I think that having that level of consideration and conversation around the history of Aotearoa and this agreement that took place between the Crown and Hapu, iwi today, but, you know, between Crown and Māori is such an important part of the fabric of our nation. And I think now more than ever, where organisations are really needing to think about that relationship in a lot more of a meaningful way. And so I think your governance needs to have the strategic will and also iron determination to actually implement something in order for that to then flow down across and throughout the organisation to service delivery or to the delivery of charity into communities. So that's one, is to look at treaty training and also looking at a Te Tiriti strategy. or becoming a Te Tiriti dynamic organisation, and there's a lot of resources available through community research. There's also a platform called the Treaty Workers platform as well. So there's a lot of how-to guides on how to do it. So there's really and there's also professional consultants that do that work. They will actually come to an organisation and walk beside you. I think equally there's a bigger conversation around around power and equity. So again, we are shifting our sights from seeing people as the recipients of charity to actually being seen as partners. And when you treat people as partners, then we're looking at not only what we deliver at this side of the organisation, but how do we bring more Māori tangata whenua in as partners, as givers, and what does that look like? How do we strategically hire so that we have more Māori influencing at a governance level, at a senior management level? How do we also foster meaningful relationships at a local level with hapu, iwi, and also ensuring that, we're not burdening people with our own educational needs. So you need to come to the table as a partner, and therefore that means that you've done your own inner work, you've done your own strategic work, and you're actually coming to offer something of substance to your tribal partner. So I think those are a bunch of ideas that could be helpful to any organisation on this journey, and seeing it as a journey that might take a lifetime, but the benefits of systemically changing the way that you do what you do will only have great benefits across the board.
Brilliant. And just leading on from that, I think what would be the key indicators or the markers that signify like a genuine, impactful, mutually beneficial partnership with Indigenous communities exists or is ready to exist? Is there anything what would you acknowledge as a key indicator or a marker to that?
I think metrics of success depend on what your strategy is and what you want to achieve as an organisation. So how do I know that we are, what do I see, how do I feel, what do I experience once we've implemented this new approach? And it may be at a strategic level, we're aiming to have some meaningful memorandums of agreement or agreements, heads of agreement, documents signed off between ourselves and tribal entities or Māori entities. We might look at a goal of increasing the number of skilled Māori employed within our organisation. So we aim to have at least 1 or 2 board members. We're aiming to have at least 1 or 2 relationship managers. And they are resourced to be able to do their job effectively. That to me would be a measure of success. I'd ask the staff how many want to learn about, te reo, or learn te reo rather, and what types of meaningful engagements are we having? Whether or not that's community engagements or learners of te reo Māori, or or projects that are coming forward, an increase of projects and investment. And then I think, investment generally is also a big metric as well. How do we go from maybe investing in 0 Māori-led projects to having, 20, 30%, and having some very clear, definitive outcomes that you've committed to as an organisation? But those, again, are ideas. It just depends on what you want to see.
Awesome. We'll come back and just towards the end to tell you a little bit more about some of the things we are going to be doing with Kimberly and her organisation. Alex, I'm going to come back to you. So your session, we had a couple of comments, it's amazing. It was a lot. I'm a tiny organisation. I'm a small fundraising team. How feasible is it to implement these techniques when you have limited resources?
I think it's a great question. And I had to put my thinking cap on for this one. In part, it's kind of based on the data you're already collecting. So if you're collecting data, then, you know, have a look at it, put into Excel, you know, run some pivot tables or some pie charts or something like that on it. If you're not collecting a lot of data, something that Jess said earlier was actually something I was going to mention. Anyone can run a survey of their donors on SurveyMonkey. And it struck me that if you kind of started with the end in mind and you wanted to build a profile, if you look at census data, which is freely available on the internet for Australia and for New Zealand, and you wanted to understand, you know, how New Zealand is divided by age or income or whatever it happens to be, and then you ask some of those questions in an anonymized survey to your donors, then you could actually build some comparative understandings to just you get a really rough feel for, you know, are my donors older or younger or more male or more female or whatever it happens to be in the population. If you are collecting data but you're not mathematically geared, it struck me that there's a lot of young people that really want to help in the world. And there's people doing statistics degrees that would probably love to help a charity, that would love to get a job like that, but, you know, an internship or just something like that would be great. So I had a thought, which was the danger with doing this is that they don't necessarily have enough experience and they don't have the business view and they might get it wrong. If you brought on 2 data interns and got them to take it in turns doing projects and then peer reviewing the other one's work, you might find you get some really good insights by getting some volunteers. That would be really great. So, you know, you could reach out to a university and say, you know, have you got any graduates that would like to donate some time to this charity? We'll obviously write them a letter of recommendation, that sort of thing. So trying to think outside the square just in terms of how you can collect the data, but also maybe how you can leverage it without having to pay, you know, squillions of dollars.
Yeah, and one of the things we are going to do next year in the community is introduce a time bank for the kind of separate from a coaching program, more a peer-to-peer mentoring program, where maybe as a time bank is an exchange of time for experience. So it might be that there is another colleague out there that can help you and you know something else. So I think hopefully that might kind of be able to, sometimes you just need advice from a colleague on what you have got and what you can do as well. So hopefully Time Bank that we're going to introduce will offer a little bit of support. Jess, I'm going to come back to you.
I was just going to say, if anyone really has ideas, they want to do something and they're not sure if they're a great idea, anyone that's up Nest Best, very happy, just reach out to me and I'll have a half an hour chat and give you some feedback as to whether I think it's a good idea or some different ways to look at it. It's no problem whatsoever from me.
That's awesome. Well, awesome, Alex. And Jess, I'm going to come back to you almost on the flip side of what we spoke about before. If you're a small organization, it's almost beneficial because you can send those Christmas or birthday cards. When you've got when you have created an amazing donor-centric journey like you have, and then you've got an acceleration of growth, there's clear risks there of expectations. What advice would you have on sustaining a very kind of strong donor-centric program when you grow successfully?
Oh yeah, that's a tricky question. That's something I'm going through at the moment. I don't change too quickly, and I think when you're growing really quickly, you're still going to have this pool of original donors who supported you. Don't just change your whole approach to those original people. And if that means segmenting your audience to those kind of traditional, they're used to this, then find a way to keep it like that. So keep writing them those handwritten cards. The new people that come on board as you grow, they're probably used to how you've treated them as they've come on, if that makes sense. So probably a bit more of the digital engagement and targeting. But I've found that we've really had to segment our data out, and those traditional people that were on board with us and used to those phone calls, we just make sure that they're tagged when they donate, and we pick up the phone and keep doing and it does mean it is a bit of hard work. I think when you go through a lot of growth very quickly, it is challenging, and there's not really any direct answer about it. But I think just be careful that you don't lose yourself in the process and try to stay really true to those original roots and who you are. No real clear answer, but that would be my best advice.
Thanks, Jess. I'm going to come back to you, Kay Marie. I've got it around kind of misunderstandings and misinterpretations. So there is complexities and cultural differences, and I'm sure you've experienced many instances where misunderstandings or misinterpretations have occurred during the partnership building process. Have you got any, I guess, examples or fundamental approaches on how to resolve these?
Yeah, we have a process called intentional design. It's called the IDP, intentional design process. So I like to create space for things to emerge organically, because I think that's important. It's how you get to know, hey, look, how we're going to be friends, and do we want to work together, and can we do something together? It's kind of like a marriage, you know, you've got to date for a bit and suss each other out and see, hey, is this going to work? And I think that we have to be willing to be honest, frank, and straight up about what we need from each other as partners. And if we don't put that on the table, then hopefully somebody that might be a skilled facilitator can bring that out. But I think that that dance is so important before we actually move to the next phase of working side by side. So once we've got everything, you know, out on the table, you know, then do we proceed to some sort of agreement where we kind of outline how we want to work together and how we want to play together? But I think there's another really important part of the conversation is, what if we don't like each other?
Yeah.
You know, like this time worked really well for us up to a certain point, but actually now I want out. And what's the process for us to manage conflict, which will occur? It's not, you know, hey, we'll keep it nice and friendly. Because sometimes being nice, in my view, is more harmful than being honest.
Yeah.
And if we choose to be nice versus being honest, then we're doing the relationship a disservice. So just creating those boundaries and parameters, and also the exit strategy. So again, if this relationship doesn't work for us anymore, then we want to be able to do this in a way that keeps our mana intact.
Yeah.
And if we engage in a relationship where the mana is enhanced, so the ideal is that as a result of us getting together, we're going to both benefit from the relationship and the opportunity. And then equally, if there are situations where my mana is actually being depleted, my life force is being depleted, I'm wasting time, my precious time, your precious time, we know that actually it's time for us to exit. And it doesn't have to be ugly. We just have to create space for us to be able to exit out accordingly. So that's kind of our intentional design process that we put in play. I think it takes a while, and I've learned that relationships, you should go, there are certain points where you go slow, and there are certain points where you go fast. I think the first dance, where we're getting to know each other, that needs to take as long as it needs to take.
Yeah.
We don't move until both parties agree.
I love it. I agree. And even I always think that with staff, when staff leave, why aren't they celebrated when they've chosen, especially if they're going on to, you know, their career growth, and they're going on to learn amazing stuff that they could only have learned because of the relationship they had? Why isn't it celebrated as much as it is when they join an organization? I think it's the same as partnerships. Even if it does come to a point where it's not working anymore, there will have been something you achieved together. Celebrate that when you exit, and look, you know, wish each other well. I think it's just, good faith and be a good human, and don't, I was going to say don't be a dick, but I think I can say that. I don't think anyone here is going to be offended that of the recording.
Awesome. I think you could say that that's an okay piece of our bodies. We could say, you know, just don't be horrid, don't be an asshole, don't be terrible, you know, like anyone has the ability to do that. Be a good person.
Just be a good human. Absolutely. So we're just about coming to the end of our session. I'm just going to ask the our speakers of the Nest Fest. Do any of you have any questions for any of your other speaker friends?
I will in a minute. Can I just jump in, Michelle, and acknowledge that Isabel posted a little question in the chat? That Isabel, I will drop a little link in there in terms of privacy data, all the risk register stuff that we should be considering around artificial intelligence, and there's some really good reading for you there. It's not my area, but this is important. It's a framework toward responsible AI for fundraising that you might find worthy of some further reading there.
Cool. I had a quick question, which is just to Jess. I absolutely loved your session. My wife's a scientist, funnily enough, and I got super excited about a lot of what you were talking about. How do I get onto your newsletter so I start learning more about what you're doing? Because it was super exciting and wonderful.
Front page of our website. If you go on to it, and all you need to do is give us your name and your email address. So super easy to fill out.
Cool, I'll do that.
Fabulous.
Thank you. That was so exciting what you were talking about.
Awesome.
It's very we just released our trial results as well. And so yeah.
On that super thing that tells you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Out of it.
No, very, very exciting.
Awesome. I'm going to throw Isha in the spotlight here, and she will probably be like, "Why did you do that? You didn't tell me you were going to do that." Isha, would you like to just give a little bit of a heads up to everyone around some of the intentions we have with MEA next year, and MEA making everything achievable, and what we're looking at doing with our MOU with those guys?
Yeah, sure. Like Kay Marie said, we're like in the beginning, we're just dating at the moment.
Yeah.
We're actually, I mean, you guys probably did like a little speed dating. Me and Kay Marie and Fundraising Nest and the whole team at MEA are starting to go on a couple of dates together now.
Yeah.
We are talking, we've got some, Kay Marie and I kind of came up with some cool deliverables. We're talking about doing quite a few virtual and in-person events next year that are directed specifically at Indigenous Māori Pacific Island communities fundraisers. That's really cool. I've just started some cool conversations with some connections we've got that I haven't actually told Kay Marie about yet, but I will. We're going to build a space in the hub called Te Kohanga, which means the nest in Te Reo Māori, that will have some Māori Indigenous specific resources that both non-Indigenous and Indigenous people can use to share, to understand this our shared space.
That's going to be launched quite soon. Yeah, we're hoping to have that out before the end of the year.
Before the end of the year.
We've already got some things to actually put in there. We'll put the interview I did with the conversation. Maven Time with Kay Marie would be the first video in there, but we've got some more video content and things we can put in there. And a glossary of terms, wasn't it? That's something that kind of excites me. We all know that there's a global CFRE glossary of terms that some of our mavens and the originals, Nigel Harris, the Clive Pedleys, the Ken Burnett's, who were kind of originally involved in creating as a global recognition of glossary of terms, which is on the CFRE website. And yes, it probably needs a refresh anyway, but the four of our mavens have agreed to take on this project in collaboration with the Fundraising Nest and Making Everything Achievable to create a glossary of terms that's a bit more refreshed, but also has the kind of the equivalent meaning and kind of language in Indigenous and Māori Pacifica kind of language glossary. I think it's going to be quite a really useful tool to look at a glance what all of these kind of terms look like. And yeah, like I said, we'll be doing several virtual sessions next year, and we're looking at a potential overnight, an overnight event at the Marae. We will say we're definitely coming back to New Zealand next year. We're bringing the Nest Fest 2024 to Auckland. We're looking at Auckland and Wellington, but what we potentially might focus on is 2 days in Auckland. First day will be a masterclass with international speakers, and we'll bring them from overseas. And then the second day will be a conference, potentially with a second stream looking at Indigenous and Māori and Pacific. So we might have a couple of streams on the second day, but turning it into a bit kind of a bigger conference, but in one location. we need to find out if that's something the community want, can afford, and we definitely don't want to be exclusive. That's what we're thinking at the moment. But if we need to, we might do the smaller satellite kind of events in the smaller locations. But we are just laying the foundations, but the Nest Fest will definitely be back. We'll be back in New Zealand for sure next year. I want to thank everyone for joining us today, and I really hope you have try and wind down and have a wonderful festive period, whatever that looks like for you guys over the upcoming kind of end of year break. And thank you everyone for joining us in Auckland and Wellington and today. And we will definitely keep in touch. Thank you all, everyone.